The storm hit without warning at 3 in the morning. Captain Elena Rodriguez had been sailing for 20 years, but she had never seen waves like these. They rose like mountains made of black water, crashing over the bow of the Meridian Star with such force that the entire ship shuddered. Her crew of 23 men and women held on to whatever they could find as the vessel pitched from side to side. Alina stood on the bridge, gripping the rails so hard her knuckles turned white. The rain hammered against the windows so thick that she could barely see 10 feet ahead. The wind screamed like a living thing, and somewhere deep in the belly of the ship, metal groaned in protest. She had ordered her crew to secure everything hours ago, but the storm was getting worse, not better. Then she felt it. A grinding, terrible sound that rose up through the floor and into her bones. The ship lurched sideways, throwing 2 of her officers against the wall. Alarms began to scream throughout the vessel. Alina grabbed the radio with shaking hands. "Engine room, report," she shouted over the noise. The voice that came back was filled with panic. "Captain, we hit something. Debris in the water. The hull is breached on the starboard side. We're taking on water fast." Elena's blood turned to ice. They were more than 2,000 miles from the nearest land in the middle of the Pacific Ocean during typhoon season. She ran to the computer console and pulled up their position. The screen showed nothing but empty ocean in every direction. No ships, no rescue stations, nothing. "How bad is it?" she asked, though she already knew the answer would not be good. "The pumps can't keep up, Captain. We've got maybe 2 days before we go under. Maybe less if this storm keeps up." Elena looked out at the massive waves and knew 2 days was optimistic. She turned to her first officer, a young man named David Chen, who had only been with them for 6 months. His face was pale, but his jaw was set with determination. "Send out an SOS," she told him. "Send it on every frequency we have. Tell them we need immediate assistance." David's fingers flew over the controls. The distress signal went out into the darkness. A desperate electronic scream for help that traveled at the speed of light across the ocean. Alina watched the screen, waiting for a response. Minutes ticked by. The ship continued to list further to the right as more water poured into the lower decks. Finally, a response came through. It was the Maritime Authority station in Hawaii. The voice was professional but distant. "Meridian Star, we have received your distress call. We are coordinating a rescue effort. The nearest Coast Guard vessel is approximately 7 days away from your position. Additional resources are being contacted." 7 days. Elena closed her eyes. They would be at the bottom of the ocean in 7 days. The ship groaned again, and she felt it settle lower in the water. She knew ships, and she knew when one was dying. The Meridian Star was dying. "Request immediate air rescue," she said into the radio, trying to keep her voice steady. "Negative, Meridian Star. Weather conditions prohibit flight operations in your area. The storm system is too large. All aircraft are grounded." Elena wanted to scream. She wanted to throw the radio across the room. Instead, she took a deep breath and started thinking. She had a crew depending on her. She had to find a way to keep them alive. "Prepare the life rafts," she ordered, "but don't deploy them yet. In these waves, they'll be torn apart in minutes." The crew moved to obey, but Elena could see the fear in their eyes. They all knew what she knew. The life rafts were not designed for waves this size. If they abandoned ship now, they would be trading one death for another. But if they stayed on the Meridian Star, they would go down with her when she finally sank. Elena contacted the engine room again. Her chief engineer, a tough woman named Maria Santos, gave her the numbers. The water was rising 6 inches every hour. The pumps were working at maximum capacity, but could not keep pace. The list to starboard was now 15 degrees and getting worse. In 18 hours, maybe 24 if they were lucky, the ship would roll over and sink. More responses came in over the radio. A commercial cargo ship acknowledged their distress call, but reported they were under orders to avoid the storm area. Another vessel, a fishing trawler, was too small and too far away to help. A Navy ship was in the region, but was dealing with its own emergency and could not. Divert Elena felt the weight of command crushing down on her shoulders. She had led her crew into this storm. She had made the decision to take this route, and now she might lead them all to their deaths. The hours dragged on. The storm did not let up. Water continued to pour into the hull. Alina ordered non-essential crew to the upper decks, away from the flooding. She had them put on life jackets and cold weather gear. Some of them prayed. Others sat in silence, staring at nothing. A few tried to joke and keep spirits up, but the laughter sounded hollow against the roar of the wind. At dawn, the sun did not rise. The sky remained black, choked with clouds and rain. The meridian star had settled so low in the water that waves were washing across the main deck. Alina knew they were running out of time. Then, 6:47 in the morning, a new voice crackled through the radio. It was different from the others. Calm, confident, almost casual. Meridian Star, this is Deathworlder Rescue Fleet, Task Force Sentinel. We have received your distress call. What is your current situation? Alina grabbed the radio. Who is this? Are you Coast Guard? Negative, Meridian Star. We're civilian rescue. We operate independently. We're approximately 340 nautical miles from your position. We're coming to get you. Alina felt a surge of hope, but also confusion. 340 miles in this storm? That's impossible. It will take you days. The voice on the other end gave a short laugh. We don't do impossible. We're pushing the engines hard. We'll be there in 16 hours. Can you hold out that long? Alina looked at the water sloshing across the deck. She looked at her crew, huddled together against the wind and rain. She thought about Maria down in the engine room, fighting to keep the pumps running. She thought about all the years she had spent at sea, all the storms she had survived. We'll hold, she said into the radio. We'll be here. Good, the voice responded. Sit tight, Captain. We're coming fast. Nobody gets left behind today. Alina held the radio in her hand long after the transmission ended. She did not know who these people were. She did not know if they could really reach them in time. But for the first time since the storm hit, she felt something other than fear. She felt hope. Commander James Vance stood on the bridge of the Wrathful, staring at the storm ahead. The waves were enormous, but he had seen worse. He had been through worse. That was why they called him Reaper. Not because he brought death, but because he had looked death in the face so many times that it no longer scared him. Distance to target? He asked his navigator. 320 miles, sir. Storm is slowing us down, but we're making good time. James nodded. Behind the Wrathful, 2 other ships followed. The Defiant, a fast catamaran rescue boat piloted by Sarah Chen, and the Relentless, a heavy salvage tug commanded by Mikhail Petrov. Together, they made up the Deathworlder rescue fleet. 3 ships and 42 crew members, who had all chosen to spend their lives saving strangers. James had not always been a rescuer. 5 years ago, he had been a Navy SEAL, one of the best. He had completed missions in every ocean on Earth. He had jumped from helicopters, dove from submarines, and fought in places most people had never heard of. Then he retired and became a merchant marine, thinking he wanted a quieter life. But quiet did not last long. One evening, while his ship was docked in Italy, he watched the news in a waterfront bar. A refugee boat had capsized in the Mediterranean Sea. Over 200 people were in the water, drowning. And the Coast Guard was delayed because of political arguments between countries about who was responsible for the rescue. James watched as reporters counted the bodies. 147 people died while governments argued on the phone. He could not sleep that night. He could not eat. He kept seeing those faces on the television, kept hearing the screams. He had spent his entire military career being told that his mission was to save lives and protect the innocent. And yet, when it mattered most, bureaucracy and politics had let those people die. James made a decision. He emptied his bank account, took out loans, and bought a decommissioned patrol boat from the Canadian Coast Guard. It was old and beat up, but it was fast and it was tough. He fixed it up himself, working 18-hour days in a shipyard. When it was ready, he painted a name on the side, Wrathful. He posted his plan online. He said he was going to create a rescue organization that would go anywhere, help anyone, and would not wait for permission. Within a week, his inbox was flooded with messages. Some people called him crazy. Others called him a hero, but a few called him and said, "I want to help." Sarah Chen was one of the first. She had been a Coast Guard helicopter pilot for 8 years. She was one of the best pilots in her unit, with over 300 successful rescues. Then she was discharged for disobeying orders. She had been told to wait for clearance before flying into a hurricane to rescue a family stranded on a sinking yacht. She flew anyway, saved all 5 people, and was fired for it the next day. When James called her, she did not hesitate. "When do we start?" she asked. Mikhail Petrov came next. He was a Russian icebreaker captain who had spent 20 years breaking through Arctic ice to reach stranded ships. He was massive, with a thick beard and hands like sledgehammers. He had grown tired of watching his government use rescue operations as political tools, helping some ships and ignoring others based on what country they came from. He told James, "The ocean does not care about politics. Neither should we." Others followed. Engineers, medics, divers, sailors from a dozen different countries. Some were retired military. Some were former Coast Guard. Some were just ordinary people who had skills and wanted to help. They all had one thing in common. They had seen people die because help came too late or did not come at all. They called themselves Deathworlders. The name came from an argument with a government official who called them death seekers. For wanting to operate in dangerous conditions, James had smiled and said, "We come from Earth, friend. Earth is a death world compared to your comfortable office. And we're not seeking death. We're fighting it." The name stuck. Within a year, they had 3 ships and had completed 12 rescues. Within 2 years, 28 rescues. They pulled people from sinking boats, from flood zones, from collapsed bridges over rivers. They did not ask about nationality, legal status, or ability to pay. They just asked, "Do you need help?" The international maritime community did not know what to make of them. Some officials praised them. Others tried to shut them down, claiming they were operating illegally, that they were putting their own crews in danger, that they were encouraging people to take risks because they knew rescue was available. James ignored all of it. He had a simple rule. If someone was in danger and needed help, they would come. Money was always tight. They survived on donations, mostly from ordinary people who gave $5 or $10 at a time. A few wealthy individuals who believed in their mission gave larger amounts. They bought equipment secondhand, repaired it themselves, and made it work. The ships were not fancy, but they were reliable. Sarah upgraded the helicopter with her own money. It was an old military transport bird that should have been retired years ago, but she kept it flying through sheer skill and stubbornness. Mikhail added extra pumps and towing equipment to the Relentless, turning it into a floating rescue platform that could stabilize sinking ships. They trained constantly. Every crew member had to know how to handle multiple jobs. Medics learned navigation. Engineers learned rescue techniques. Everyone learned how to survive in extreme conditions. James pushed them hard because he knew that out on the ocean, in a storm, there was no room for mistakes. The media started paying attention after their 20th rescue. They saved a tour boat full of students that had caught fire off the coast of South America. Every major news channel covered it. Reporters asked James why he did it. He told them, because someone has to. Because every single one of those kids deserved to go home to their families. Some governments started working with them quietly. Coast Guard commanders who were frustrated by their own limitations would tip off the Deathworlders about situations that needed fast response. Other governments tried to arrest them when they entered territorial waters without permission. James had been detained 4 times in 3 years. Each time, public pressure forced his release. Now, racing through a typhoon toward the Meridian Star, James thought about all of it. Every rescue. Every person they had pulled from the water. Every night he had gone to sleep knowing that someone was alive because of what they did. It was worth every risk, every sacrifice, every moment of fear. "Commander," Sarah's voice came through the radio. "We're picking up some serious weather ahead. This storm is worse than the forecast predicted. Can your bird fly in it?" James asked. There was a pause. "I can fly in anything, Commander. The question is whether I should." James smiled. That was Sarah's way of saying yes. "Stay ready. When we reach the Meridian Star, I need you in the air." "Copy that." Kekale's voice came through next, his thick accent making the radio crackle. Wrathful, this is relentless. My engines are complaining, but they will hold. We will be there. James looked at the storm ahead. 16 hours to go? He thought about Captain Rodriguez and her crew, fighting to keep their ship afloat. He thought about how scared they must be, trapped in a sinking vessel with no help in sight except for 3 ships crewed by people the world called crazy. All ships, he said into the radio. We don't stop. We don't slow down. 23 people are counting on us. We will reach them in time. The Deathworlder fleet pushed forward into the teeth of the storm. The Wrathful cut through the waves, like a knife through flesh. James had the engines running at maximum power, pushing them far beyond what the manufacturer recommended. Down in the engine room, his chief engineer kept calling up to the bridge with warnings about overheating, about stress on the hull, about a dozen things that could go wrong. James told him to keep the engines running and worry about repairs later. Every hour, Lena Rodriguez checked in from the Meridian Star. Her voice grew more strained with each transmission. The water was rising faster than expected. The list to starboard had increased to 20 degrees. Some of her crew were getting seasick from the constant tilting and rocking. Worse, the cold was setting in. The storm had dropped the temperature, and with water flooding through the lower decks, there was no way to keep warm. How much longer? Alina asked during the 8th hour. 8 hours, James replied. Can you hold? We'll try. James knew what those words meant. Alina was not sure they would make it. He pushed the engines harder. Sarah Chen launched her reconnaissance drone at hour 10. It was a risky move. The winds were strong enough to tear the small aircraft apart, but they needed to see what they were dealing with. The drone climbed into the storm, its camera sending back shaky footage of towering waves and dark clouds. Then it spotted the Meridian Star. James felt his stomach drop when he saw the image. The ship was sitting so low in the water that waves were washing completely over the main deck. It was barely floating. He had seen ships in that condition before. They did not last long. All crews, he said over the radio. We need to move faster. The Meridian Star is in worse shape than we thought. Commander, the engines cannot take more, his engineer protested. Make them take more, James ordered. I don't care if we have to rebuild them after this. Those people need us now. The drone made one more pass over the cargo ship, then a gust of wind caught it and sent it spinning into the ocean. Sarah cursed over the radio, but the footage had given them what they needed. They knew exactly where the ship was and how bad things were. At hour 12, James got a radio call he was not expecting. It was from the International Maritime Authority headquarters. The voice was official and cold. Commander Vance, this is Maritime Authority Central. We are ordering you to cease your current operation and return to port. James gripped the radio. On what grounds? The weather conditions are too dangerous. You are putting your crews at unnecessary risk. The Meridian Star crew should abandon ship and wait for the storm to pass. We have rescue aircraft standing by for when conditions improve. Those people don't have time to wait, James said, keeping his voice level. Their ship is going down. If they abandon into life rafts in these seas, they'll die. That is not your decision to make, Commander. You are not an official rescue organization. You do not have authority to operate in this area. Turn back now or face legal consequences. James looked at his crew on the bridge. They were all watching him, waiting to see what he would do. He thought about the 147 people who drowned in the Mediterranean while officials argued. He thought about every person his crew had saved because they did not wait for permission. He switched the radio to an open frequency so everyone could hear his response. Maritime Authority Central. This is Commander Vance of the Deathworlder Rescue Fleet. 23 souls are about to go. Into the water in the middle of a typhoon. We are 16 miles away and closing fast. We are not turning back. We will reach them, and we will bring every single one of them home safe. You can file whatever charges you want after we're done. Wrathful out. He switched off the radio before they could respond. His crew cheered. Sarah's voice came through from the Defiant. That's why we follow you, Commander. But James did not feel triumphant. He had just ended his career, probably, After this rescue, assuming they survived, he would likely face serious legal charges. The Deathworlder fleet might be shut down permanently. But none of that mattered if they saved those 23 people. At R14, disaster struck. Elena's voice came over the radio, high and panicked. "Wrathful, our engines just failed. We've lost all power. The ship is starting to roll." James felt ice in his veins. Without engines, without power, the Meridian Star had no way to stabilize itself. It would roll over within minutes. "Captain Rodriguez, you need to abandon ship now. Get your crew into the life rafts."
Alfs!
"But in these waves now, Captain. You're out of time." James turned to his navigator. "How far?" 12 miles, sir." 12 miles. At their current speed, that was still 20 minutes away. Too long. Way too long. "Sarah," James called over the radio. "Are you ready to fly?" "In this weather, Commander, it's suicide. Those people are in the water. They need you." There was a long pause. Then Sarah said, "Launching now." James heard the helicopter engines roar to life on the Defiant. Through his binoculars, he could see the aircraft lift off from the pitching deck of the catamaran. It was an insane thing to attempt. The winds could flip the helicopter like a toy. But Sarah Chen had never backed down from a challenge in her life. The helicopter disappeared into the storm. James listened to Sarah's breathing over the radio as she fought to keep the bird steady. Every few seconds, she would curse in Mandarin as a wind gust hit her. But she kept flying. On the Meridian Star, Alina was getting her crew into the life rafts. It was chaos. The ship was tilting so badly that people were sliding across the deck. One crew member fell into the water and had to be pulled back by a safety line. The life rafts deployed automatically, inflating in the howling wind. 2 of them were torn from their moorings immediately and blown away. The remaining rafts bobbed in the massive waves like toys in a bathtub. "Everyone in the rafts now," Alina shouted. She did a head count as her crew climbed into the rubber boats. 22. She counted again. 22. Someone was missing. "Maria." Alina screamed into her radio. "Maria, where are you?" "Engine room, Captain." Maria's voice was calm, despite the situation. "The pumps are still running. I can buy you a few more minutes. Get out of there now." "That's an order." "Sorry, Captain. These pumps need someone to watch them." Elena wanted to go down there herself to drag Maria out, but she knew that would be stupid. The ship could go over at any second. Instead, she climbed into the last life raft and cut it loose. The tiny boat immediately dropped into a trough between 2 waves, and Elena's stomach lurched as they fell what felt like 3 stories straight down. The life rafts were scattered across the ocean now, each one rising and falling with the massive swells. In the darkness and rain, they could barely see each other. Alina held tight to the rope handles, praying that the Deathworlder fleet was as good as their reputation claimed. Then she heard it. The sound of helicopter blades cutting through the storm. A spotlight pierced the darkness, sweeping across the water. Sarah Chen had arrived. James watched through his binoculars as Sarah's helicopter hovered over the first life raft. It was nearly impossible flying. The wind kept pushing the helicopter sideways, and Sarah had to constantly adjust to stay in position. A crew member was lowered on a cable, swinging wildly as he descended toward the raft. "Come on, Sarah," James whispered. "You can do this." The crew member reached the raft and grabbed the first survivor, clipping them to the cable. The helicopter winched them up slowly. 1 down. 22 to go. But the helicopter could only carry a few people at a time before it needed to land and offload them. And the Meridian Star was sinking fast. James could see its bow rising out of the water now, the ship beginning its final death roll. "Right. All ships converge on those life rafts," James ordered. "We're about to make this interesting." The Wrathful, Defiant, and Relentless raced toward the scattered survivors. James knew the next hour would determine whether they saved everyone or lost them all. The Wrathful arrived at the scene. Just as one of the life rafts flipped over, James watched in horror as 3 people were thrown into the churning water. They were wearing life jackets, but in waves this size, that would only keep them afloat for so long before hypothermia took them. "Mikhail, take the capsized raft," James ordered. "Sarah, keep pulling people from the stable rafts. We'll collect the swimmers." The three ships spread out, each taking a section of the scattered survivors. James brought the Wrathful alongside a group of 2 swimmers who were clinging to each other in the water. His crew threw rescue lines, but the waves kept pulling the swimmers away before they could grab them. "We need to get closer," James shouted to his helmsman. "Sir, if we get much closer in these swells, we could crush them against the hull." "No, do it anyway." The Wrathful crept forward, its crew leaning over the rails with poles and ropes. A massive wave lifted the ship and then dropped it. For a terrifying moment, James thought they would land right on top of the swimmers. But his helmsman compensated at the last second, and the ship settled just feet away from them. 2 crew members dove into the water with safety lines attached. They reached the swimmers and clipped them to the lines. "Pull." James shouted, and his crew hauled both swimmers and rescuers back to the ship. They got them over the rail and onto the deck, where medics immediately wrapped them in thermal blankets 2 down. 21 to go. Sarah was having her own problems in the helicopter. She had managed to winch up 4 people from 2 different rafts. But her fuel was running low, and the wind was getting worse. Her crew chief, Marcus Webb, was hanging from the cable trying to reach a raft that kept sliding away in the waves. "Sarah, I can't get to them," Marcus said over the radio. "Every time I get close, the wind pushes me away." "Hold on," Sarah said through gritted teeth. She was fighting the controls with everything she had. The helicopter wanted to flip, wanted to spin, wanted to do anything except hover steady. But Sarah had been flying for 15 years, and she knew every trick in the book. She angled the helicopter into the wind, using the storm itself to hold her position. Marcus dropped down again, and this time he reached the raft. He grabbed a young woman who was barely conscious from the cold and clipped her to the cable. "Winch up," he shouted. The cable pulled them up slowly. Halfway to the helicopter, a gust of wind sent them spinning. Marcus wrapped his body around the woman, protecting her from slamming into the helicopter's undercarriage as they were pulled inside. The moment they were in, Sarah banked away from the rafts and headed for the Defiant to drop off her passengers. On the Relentless, Mikhail Petrov was attempting something that violated every safety rule ever written. He had spotted a group of 4 swimmers who had been in the water too long. They were barely moving, their arms waving weakly. They would not last much longer. Mikhail made a decision. He pushed the Relentless to full speed and aimed directly between 2 massive waves. The ship shot forward into the trough, creating a brief pocket of relatively calm water in its wake. He shouted, and his crew threw ropes in every direction. The swimmers grabbed the ropes. Mikhail's crew pulled them aboard with desperate speed. They got 3 of them. The 4th was too weak to hold on, his hands slipping from the rope. Mikhail did not hesitate. He tied a line around his own waist and jumped into the ocean. The cold water hit him like a hammer. Mikhail was a big man, strong from decades of physical work, but the ocean did not care. A wave rolled over him, and for a moment he could not tell which way was up. Then he saw the swimmer, floating face down just a few feet away. Mikhail grabbed the man and turned him over. The swimmer was unconscious but still breathing. Mikhail held him tight and felt the rope around his waist go taut. His crew pulled them both back to the ship, hauling them up the side like fish on a line. They landed on the deck in a heap, both gasping for air. "You're insane," one of his crew members said. Mikhail coughed up seawater and grinned. "You're just figuring this out now?" James was coordinating everything from the bridge of the Wrathful, watching his ships work together like pieces of a machine. They had pulled 15 people from the water so far, 8 more to go. But his crew was getting exhausted. The ships were taking a beating from the waves. And Sarah was on her last tank of fuel. Then Elena's voice came over the radio. "Wrathful, this is Captain Rodriguez. We're missing one. Maria Santos, my chief engineer. She stayed in the engine room to keep the pumps running. She might still be on the ship." James looked out at the Meridian star. The ship was standing almost vertical now, its bow pointing at the sky. It was seconds away from sinking. If Maria was still inside, she was already dead. But James had not come this far to give up on anyone. "Sarah, can you get to that ship?" he asked. "Commander, my fuel, I know." "Can you get to that ship?" There was a pause. Then Sarah said, "One pass. That's all I've got." Sarah pushed her helicopter toward the dying cargo ship. She brought it in from the stern, which was the only part still above water. Marcus was lowered on the cable, and he landed on the tilted deck, nearly sliding off into the ocean. He grabbed a rail and pulled himself to the door that led below decks. The door was jammed. The ship's angle made it almost impossible to open. Marcus braced his feet and pulled with all his strength. The door moved an inch. 2 inches. Then it flew open and water poured out, nearly knocking him down. "Maria Santos." Marcus shouted into the darkness. "Maria, are you in there?" Nothing. Just the sound of rushing water and groaning metal. Marcus tied his safety line to the rail and climbed into the flooded corridor. The water was up to his chest, ice cold. The entire ship was shaking like it was about to break apart. He waded forward, feeling his way in the darkness. His flashlight had been torn away when the door opened. He called Maria's name again and again. Then he heard something. A weak voice, barely audible over the noise. "Here, ... Marcus followed the voice to a side corridor. Maria was there, trapped behind a collapsed bulkhead. She had been trying to keep the pumps running when the ship tilted and a wall of equipment fell on her. One of her legs was pinned. "I can't move it," she said weakly. "Go, save yourself." "Not happening," Marcus said. He grabbed the metal beam that was pinning her and lifted with everything he had. It did not budge. He tried again, his muscles screaming in protest. On the third attempt, the beam shifted just enough. Maria pulled her leg free and gasped in pain. Marcus did not ask if she could walk. He just picked her up and threw her over his shoulder. Then he ran. The water was rising fast, and the ship was tilting further. He could hear the metal screaming as the vessel began to break apart. He reached the deck and clipped Maria to his safety line. "Sarah, get us out of here now." The cable went taut, and they were lifted into the air. Below them, the Meridian Star gave one final groan and slipped beneath the waves. The ship disappeared in seconds, swallowed by the dark water as if it had never existed. Sarah flew them to the Wrathful and lowered them onto the deck. The moment Marcus and Maria were clear, she turned the helicopter toward the Defiant, running on fumes. She landed hard on the pitching deck, and the engines cut out the instant she touched down. She had made it with literally nothing left in the tank. James stood on the bridge, watching his crew pull the last survivors aboard. He did a count. 23 people rescued. 0 casualties. Against all odds, they had done it. Alina Rodriguez stood on the deck of the Wrathful, wrapped in a thermal blanket, watching the spot where her ship had gone down. She had lost her vessel, but her entire crew was alive. She turned to James, tears streaming down her face. "Hey, thank you," she said. "You saved us all." James nodded. "That's what we do." The storm was beginning to pass. The waves were still large, but not as mountainous. The rain was letting up. James looked at his 3 ships, at his exhausted crew, at the 23 survivors huddled together on the decks. They had done the impossible, but he knew the hard part was just beginning. The news cameras were waiting when the Deathworlder fleet arrived in port 3 days later. James had known they would be. A rescue this dramatic, this impossible, was exactly the kind of story that the media loved. Reporters crowded the docks, shouting questions as the Wrathful, Defiant, and Relentless pulled in. Alina Rodriguez and her crew stood on the deck waving to the cameras. They were alive because of the Deathworlders, and they wanted the world to know it. But James noticed something else waiting at the dock. Police officers. Government officials in suits. Lawyers with briefcases. His moment of triumph was about to become something much more complicated. The survivors were taken to hospitals for checkups. All 23 were in good condition, considering what they had been through. Maria Santos needed surgery on her leg, but doctors said she would make a full recovery. The Meridian Star's insurance company was already trying to figure out what to do about the lost ship James, and his crew were taken to a government building for questioning. The officials were polite, but firm. James had violated multiple laws during the rescue. He had entered restricted waters without permission. He had ignored a direct order from Maritime Authority to stand down. He had operated a rescue operation without proper licensing in that region. The list went on and on. "Do you understand the seriousness of these charges?" one official asked. James looked him in the eye. "I understand that 23 people would be dead if we had followed your orders." "That's not the point, Commander Vance. We have rules and procedures for a reason. You can't just ignore them because you think you know better." "Your rules would have killed those people," James said calmly. "Your procedures said to wait. We didn't wait. That's the difference between us." The official's face turned red, but before he could respond, his assistant came in with a tablet. "Sir, you need to see this." On the tablet was a video that had gone viral on social media. It was footage from Sarah's helicopter, showing the moment Marcus rescued Maria from the sinking ship. The video had been shared millions of times. The comments were overwhelmingly supportive of the Deathworlders. People were calling them heroes. Petitions were being started to drop all charges against them. More videos followed. Interviews with Alina and her crew, all of them praising the rescuers. News segments showing the history of the Deathworlder fleet, all the lives they had saved over the years. Opinion pieces from maritime experts saying that the official rescue response had been inadequate and that James and his crew had done exactly the right thing. The government officials did not know what to do. They could not just drop the charges without looking weak, but prosecuting the Deathworlders would be hugely unpopular. They decided to let the courts figure it out. The trial began 2 months later. James stood in the courtroom, wearing his old Navy uniform, with all his medals. Sarah, Mikhail, and several other crew members sat behind him. Alina Rodriguez and all 23 survivors from the Meridian Star were in the gallery. Showing their support, the prosecution laid out their case. James had broken laws. He had put his crew in danger. He had operated outside the proper chain of command. They showed charts and regulations, pointing out exactly which rules had been violated. Then it was the defense's turn. James's lawyer was a retired admiral who had worked in maritime law for 40 years. He called Alina Rodriguez to the stand. "Captain Rodriguez," the lawyer said, "what would have happened if the Deathworlder fleet had not come to your rescue?" Alina did not hesitate. "We would all be dead." The official rescue was 7 days away. We had less than 24 hours before our ship sank. There was no one else coming. And did Commander Vance and his crew put themselves at risk to save you? "They risked everything," Alina said, her voice breaking. "They flew helicopters in winds that should have grounded them. They jumped into water cold enough to kill in minutes. They did things that most people would call impossible. And they did it all for strangers. For people they had never met and would probably never see again." The lawyer let her words hang in the air. Then he called Maria Santos to the stand. Maria walked with a slight limp from her injured leg, but she stood straight and proud. "Miss Santos, you chose to stay on the Meridian Star while it was sinking to keep the pumps running. Why?" "Because my crew needed time to get to the rafts," Maria said. "Someone had to stay." "And when Marcus Webb came to rescue you, what did you tell him?" Maria smiled slightly. "I told him to go. To save himself. Then I was already dead. But he didn't listen. No, he didn't. He picked me up and carried me out of that ship while it was falling apart around us. I weigh 160 pounds, and he carried me like I was a child. Then that helicopter pilot flew us out while the ship was sinking beneath us. They should have all died doing that. But they did it anyway." The prosecution tried to argue that emotions did not change the fact that laws had been broken. But the judge seemed to be paying more attention to the survivors than to the lawyers. The case went on for 2 weeks, with expert witnesses and maritime officials on both sides. Then something unexpected happened. People who had been rescued by the death workers in previous operations started showing up at the courthouse. A Syrian family who had been pulled from the Mediterranean. Filipino fishermen who had been rescued from a typhoon. A group of tourists who had been saved from a sinking ferry. They came from all over the world, dozens of them, all with the same message. They saved us when no one else would. One man, a refugee from Somalia, gave testimony that made half the courtroom cry. He had been on a boat with 83 people, including his wife and 2 young daughters. The boat had been sinking off the coast of Italy. An official rescue was delayed because of a dispute about which country's waters they were in. The Deathworlders had come anyway, ignoring the political arguments, and pulled everyone from the water. "My daughters are alive because of these people," he said. Pointing at James, "They are 10 and 8 years old, and they get to grow up because someone was brave enough to break your rules." The trial became less about James and more about the entire system of maritime rescue. News programs started investigating cases where people had died while waiting for official help. Politicians were asked why the Deathworlders seemed to be able to respond faster than government organizations. The conversation was changing. The judge took 3 days to make her decision. When she returned to the courtroom, everyone held their breath. "Commander Vance," she said, "you did break the law. There is no question about that. You ignored orders, operated without proper authority, and put your crew at significant risk. Under normal circumstances, these charges would carry serious penalties, possibly including jail time." James stood straight, ready to accept whatever came. However, the judge continued, "These are not normal circumstances. You saved 23 lives. Not by accident, not by luck, but through skill, bravery, and determination. You did what our official systems failed to do. And the evidence suggests this is not an isolated incident, but part of a pattern where civilian rescue organizations are filling gaps that should not exist." She looked at the prosecution table. "The charges against Commander Vance and his crew are dismissed. Furthermore, I am recommending that international maritime law be reviewed to create a framework for licensed civilian rescue organizations to operate legally in situations where official response is inadequate or delayed." The courtroom erupted in applause. Alina and her crew were on their feet, cheering. The judge had to bang her gavel 3 times to restore order. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded James. "How do you feel about the verdict?" they asked. Relieved, James said simply, "But this was never about me. It was about whether the world is going to let good people die because of bureaucracy and politics. Today the answer was no." "What happens to the Deathworlder fleet now?" James smiled. "We keep working. There are people out there who need help, and we'll be there." 6 months later, a new international agreement was signed. Civilian rescue organizations could now operate legally in international waters, provided they met certain safety and training standards and coordinated with authorities when possible. The Deathworlder fleet was one of the first to receive official recognition. They added a 4th ship and expanded their crew to 60 people. Donations poured in from around the world. Governments that had previously tried to shut them down now sent requests for coordination. James found himself training other rescue organizations, sharing techniques and strategies. Alina Rodriguez joined the Deathworlder fleet as their operations coordinator. She had lost her ship but found a new purpose. "I know what it's like to be out there with no hope," she told James. "I want to make sure no one else feels that way." One evening, James stood on the deck of the Wrathful, watching the sun set over the ocean. His radio crackled to life. A fishing vessel was in trouble near the Cape of Good Hope. Engine failure. Taking on water? Weather conditions were rough. Distance? James asked his navigator. 1,200 miles, sir." James did the math in his head. They could be there in 36 hours if they pushed hard. He looked at his crew, and they looked back at him. No words were needed. They all knew what was coming. "All ships, this is Wrathful," James said into the radio. "We have a distress call. Prepare to depart in 30 minutes. Sarah's voice came back immediately. "Helicopter is fueled and ready, Commander." "Ah," Mikhail's deep voice followed. "Relentless is ready to sail." James smiled. This was who they were. This was what they did. Somewhere out there, people needed help. And the Deathworlder fleet would answer the call. They always did. "Fishing vessel in distress," James transmitted. "This is Deathworlder Rescue Fleet. We have received your distress call. We are 1,200 miles away. We're coming to get you. Sit tight. Nobody gets left behind today." The engines roared to life, and the 3 ships turned toward the open ocean. Behind them, the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and red. Ahead, somewhere beyond the horizon, people waited for help, and help was on its way.